Well, thank you so much for joining me today. If you wouldn't mind introducing yourself before we get into some of the questions, that would be wonderful.
Okay. Would you mind if I introduced myself in my language first?
Oh, please. Yes, go ahead.
Okay. My name is Pitapan. In my language, that means the light is coming. And it's in reference to the sun rising, actually. Just before the sun rises, we call that Pitapan.
Perfect.
And yeah, and right after the sun rises, then we have Biwapan, which is actually when you can see the sunlight coming up over the horizon. So I'm just before that. And you know, when I first got my name, I thought, I've got the wrong name. I never see this time of day. But I've come to understand that my name is about teaching. Yeah, so it's about bringing light, bringing that knowledge to the minds of others. And so I've eventually grown into my name, and my English name is Darlene Auger, and I am originally from Wabasca, and in northern Alberta. I grew up in a family of 7 siblings, and my mom and dad, in a cabin by the lake, and we also lived with my grandparents and my one aunt, so there was 13 of us. And this was before, electricity, before heat, plumbing, all of that. So I grew up in those days, and yeah, I'm aging myself, that's okay. But I loved it, and I yearn to have that. I yearn to have that again. I love to be by the water and in the trees, and yeah. I do have 2 children. They are grown now, and Fawn and Keyston, and one's an artist and one's a scholar, and actually one's a teacher. And Keyston actually helped me design the teacher's guide that I have. And I have no grandbabies yet. I'm waiting. Yes.
That's wonderful, yes. This will be a subtle hint for them then.
Real subtle.
Yeah. May I ask, did you speak English in the home growing up, or did you speak your native language? What's your experience growing up in your culture?
Oh, that's such a good question. Of course, I'm growing up in the time when colonization was, just coming to, like, residential schools were still prevalent, and all of my older siblings were in residential school, and it kind of stopped right at me. So I feel very lucky that I didn't have to go to residential school.
Yeah.
We only spoke Cree in my home. So I'm Woodland Cree, or Bush Cree, Sagao Nihio, we say. And I actually remember learning English. And I remember how difficult it was in the classroom, learning the English language. And I think what really saved me, or what created the balance, was that everyone spoke Cree. Like, all of my peers spoke Cree. And so as soon as we got out of the classroom and onto the playground, we spoke our language. And so I remember being in grade 3, so probably about 9 years old, and I was really starting to pick up on reading. And I had received an award from my teacher on attendance. And she gave me 3 Nancy Drew books.
Oh, Nancy Drew.
Nancy Drew. And I would go home and I would study these books. I would study the English language. I would study the text. And even though I wasn't really getting the story because I was just learning how to read in English, I remember saying to my mom in really broken English, "Mom, I am not going to speak to you in Cree anymore. Only English."
She'd be like, Nancy Drew, no!
And I remember my mom had her hands, in the bannock, and she just kind of looks over at me, and she just kind of does a little laugh, It's like she found it kind of funny, amusing. I was like, oh, okay. And of course, that never happened. I continued to speak Cree to my parents all through because my parents barely spoke a word of English, especially my mom. My mom didn't really go to residential school. She went there because her mother, my grandmother, worked in the kitchen. And so she had my mom with her until, for 3 years.
Right.
So, but my mom didn't come out with, a colonial Western Euro education. She still came out, with her language intact and culture intact. And we didn't practice a lot of ceremony. I do remember my grandfather, lighting the smudge. I remember the smell of the fungus that we used, for smudge in my home growing up. I remember the smell of other medicines. I remember medicines, hanging, drying from the ceiling, hanging from the ceiling. And the only ceremony I remember was what we called Wikuhtuin, which translates to the tea dance ceremony. So that's the only one I remember growing up. I think a lot of our ceremonies had gone underground by then, and so people were not openly practicing. But yes, my first language, Cree, Neheawewin, and I still speak my language to this day. Yeah.
That's so wonderful.
Yeah.
Very special to keep that connection alive.
Sure.
And my next question was thinking about you moving into young adulthood, going to school, you have your PhD, and there's a lot of colonial structure still in place with education. And so if you wouldn't mind talking about how you stayed in, connection to your identity, to your language as you were moving through the school system and then off to post-secondary and beyond.
Yeah. That's a good question too. I actually didn't even know, anything about university when I was even in high school. We weren't really introduced to what next after, grade 12. Grade 12 seemed to be the pinnacle of, Euro-Western education. And after that, we can just, get a job and it was like a great thing, to graduate from grade 12 and you didn't need to go any further. So I never thought about university or college after high school. What happened was I took an early childhood development course right out of high school, and I loved it. I loved learning about early childhood development and psychological development of children, and I was just so interested in it. One day, the professor, so the professors came from Grand Prairie Regional College to teach us in our community, to teach the program right in our community. So, so at this time, I'm like 19 years old. Right out of high school, and the professor said to me one day, Darlene, he said, have you ever thought about going to university? And I said, what's university? And he said, well, university is a bit higher education. That's where you go to get a degree. What's a degree? Well, it's a career that you follow. Whether you want to be a teacher or a doctor or a lawyer, this is where you would go to get that certification. And I'm like, oh, that's neat. And he's like, you can go to university. He said, your writing is impeccable.
Wow.
And I was like, really? And he's like, yes, I want to encourage you to go. And I said, I wouldn't even know where to go, how to get there, And he said, I'll take you.
Wow.
I'll take you. He said, I'll take you to Edmonton, which, was the nearest city to my community. And he said, I'll take you there. I'll take you to the University of Alberta campus, show you around. And if you like it, if you feel like this is a place where you can go to school, then I'll help you fill out the application forms. I'll help you get the funding that you need to go to school, and you can go. And I'm like, okay, let's go.
Those Nancy Drew books paid off, I guess.
And so, And so I came out with him, and he was true to his word and really, really helped me. And I got into university, lo and behold. So I remember he said to me, so what do you want to do? What do you want to be when you grow up?
Yeah.
And I said, I want to be a drama teacher. And he's like, all right, let's get you registered in the Faculty of Education and in drama. And he's like, do you want to teach little kids or do you want to teach high school kids? And I'm like, I want to teach high school kids. Okay, let's get you in the secondary route. And I'm like, all right, let's do this.
Yeah. Wow.
And then reality hit, right? I had to move away from my family.
Yeah.
That was hard. It was hard to leave the trees, the lake, the land, the language, and come to, cement, pavement, brick walls, hallways full of students from all over the world.
Yeah.
And it was so hard on my system, so hard. And to this day, I always, I always say that the trees saved me. The trees on campus saved me.
Yeah.
I used to go outside and just hug the trees, and sometimes I would just go down to the river there by the U of A campus, and I would just sit by the water and let the water and the trees rejuvenate me, heal me, connect me back to my family and my land. And then I could go again, and I could sit through another lecture.
Right.
And I could do another assignment. And so it was like that. It was just like one little baby step at a time.
Yeah.
It took me 10 years to complete my undergrad degree. I ended up changing halfway through my program into psychology because I had an opportunity 2 years after I did my B.Ed to go back home and teach. So even though I only had 2 years of my B.Ed degree, I was hired at the school that I graduated from just 2 years before, which was amazing because I actually remember standing at the doorway with my books after I cleaned out my locker on the last day of school and looking down that hallway and thinking to myself, I'm going to be back teaching here.
Wow.
And I didn't know anything at that point, right? But I just remember having that thought. And then I just walked away and I went and burned all my books. I was like, I'm never going to school again. So, I was in culture shock.
Right.
Just, oh my gosh, just so much, Now looking back, I think that I was traumatized by that shift, that change.
Yeah.
I think I got through because of my Cree teacher. So in university, they require you to have a second language, right? And so I remember saying to them, but I have a second language.
Yeah.
English is my second language.
Yeah.
And they were like, no. You need to take French or Spanish or German or Mandarin or, all
Right.
of these other languages. No Indigenous languages, were on the list.
Right.
And I said, no, this is not right. I do have two languages. I speak Cree and I speak English. And so I fought for that. I fought for them to allow me this, to allow me to have Cree, as my first language and English as my second. What they settled with was English as my first language.
Of course, yeah.
And Cree as my second language, which was interesting. But I said, okay, let's do it your way. And I got to take Cree, even though I was proficient in the language, speaking in the language, I didn't have the grammatical study of the language. And so I was happy to do that. I was happy to learn the syllabics,
Right.
even though I had been introduced to syllabics by my old Aunt Julie when I was just, a young teen. My old Aunt Julie had taught me some of the syllabics, which was really, really cool.
Yeah.
So coming to university, Emily Hunter, I still remember her, taught the Cree language at the university level with the syllabics. And they bumped me up into the second level because I could speak
Right.
fluently, and I was able to then study the Cree grammatically. And she became like my mom. Like, I just held on to her. I was just like, I'm going where you're going, Emily. Emily, where are you going now? So I would have lunch with her. I would go visit her after schools and on weekends. And she just kind of became my lifeline,
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's how I survived
Yeah.
that colonial institute. It was difficult for me.
Yeah.
Very difficult, yeah.
Well, I asked that question because earlier when we were talking, you had said, after you completed your PhD and you had this 300-page document, you were like, what does this even mean,
Yeah.
And I think in a kind of beautiful circular way, it brought you back to children and your interest in children and teaching.
Yeah.
And so from there, you really kind of exploded with all of these beautiful resources that are meant to, get the language and get the culture out everywhere and anywhere. Do you want to talk a bit about your kind of realization at that point in your life?
For sure. Yeah, so, that was kind of like the next major turn, I guess, in my life, shift in my life. I was, going along my merry way and trying to complete my first degree. Like 10 years into it, I'm still like trudging along. I had 2 baby breaks in between, so hey, that's important.
Yes. Yes. And a lot of work too. So.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And that's the thing, like I was paying my own way through school. So I had to work. I had to work to make ends meet. And of course now carrying these 2 sacred bundles along with me, it was difficult, but I just was so determined to get my degree, my psychology degree at this point now. And so when I was teaching in Wabasca, as I was saying earlier, teaching the Cree language, I absolutely fell in love with the kids.
Yeah.
Right? I just like, oh my God. But what happened was, what I came to realize is that a lot of the kids that were coming to school were not learner ready. Like they weren't ready to come in and sit at these desks and focus on a curriculum, that was being taught to them when they were suffering from, coming from alcoholic homes, maybe not having enough food in their cupboards. We look at the hierarchy of needs.
Yeah.
And if they don't have their basic needs met, then how can they, learn, right? How can we expect them to learn? So so what I would do sometimes is that when children were bouncing off the walls in the classroom, I would just say, okay, let's pull our desks into a circle. And this is before circle process was talked about, or the importance of circle in Indigenous culture, all of that. Before any of that, this was in the mid 80s. So I would just pull them into a circle, and just doing that calmed them right down. And then I would say, let's talk about what's happening. Let's talk about where we're at. How are you feeling today? What happened over the weekend? What did you do? Or what did you do last night? And then that's when the stories started to come out, And children, even though they can be bullies, they can also be very supportive and loving to one another. And so that started to come out. And then parents started to hear that I was doing this, that I was doing these circles. And then they wanted to get involved. They wanted to know if they could come and sit in a circle. And I got my hands slapped by the principal.
Oh no.
For doing this. Yeah.
For creating a community.
Yes. Even though it was working and it was what the kids needed, I wasn't allowed because it was not part of the curriculum. And the other thing that I wasn't allowed to do at the time was take the kids on out of the school to elders, because I wanted the kids I wanted to take the kids, and there wasn't very many children in the classroom. There must have been maybe 15, 16. I wanted to take the whole group of them to the elder's house, instead of bringing the elder into the classroom. I wanted to bring the kids to that environment, that natural environment, and just listen to the elders speaking the language. Right? Yeah. And at that time, still some of these children were speaking their languages in their homes, right? Yeah. So I had some proficient language students in my class, but there were some that didn't speak at all. And so I wanted to bring them out to that natural environment where the elders could just speak and the kids could just listen. Right. And I wasn't allowed to do that either.
How frustrating.
So, yes, it was very frustrating. And so I had to bring the elders into the classroom, and I still actually have those cassette tapes.
It was the 80s. You didn't say.
Before CDs.
Yeah.
And so I still have some of those cassette tapes of those elders that I recorded in the classroom, they would just come and share stories with the kids, about trapping and about living on the trap line and, and the animal stories and some of our origin stories and, and sing songs, with the kids and that's the way I started to bring that cultural curriculum into the classroom, even though it was supposed to be just teaching Cree.
Right.
I couldn't teach the language without teaching the culture.
Yeah.
It's just, you just can't do that.
How do you separate the two?
No,
Yeah.
and we don't compartmentalize things in the Indigenous way of knowing and doing. Everything is interconnected and related, right?
Yeah.
And so I couldn't, take it apart and put one here and put one over here. No, it just wasn't going to work like that. So, and I just, like I said, fell in love with those children, and I knew that they needed more. They needed more, and I wasn't allowed to give more at that time. And so I decided that I would go back to school, go back to university. And I switched careers at that point. I switched my education route, and I came back into psychology. And so that's probably why it took me a little bit longer too, because I kind of had to go back, to the beginning and start again another 4-year program. Yeah. But I just really wanted to be more helpful to the children and their needs and what they were going through to get them learner ready. After I finished my degree, or just as I was finishing my psychology degree in my very final year in 2001, I had a very significant spiritual experience in a ceremony, a pipe ceremony, where I was shown a large swing. It was like a little baby swing, like the little baby hammock swings.
Yeah.
And but a really, really huge one was shown to me. And an old grandmother spoke to me in the language, and she said, and what she said was, the people need to be swung. And that's all she said. And then there must have been quite a bit of time that passed. And I sort of, came out of that spiritual experience, and the ceremony had ended. And so after that, it really turned me, it turned my life into a different direction. So initially I had my life planned that I would get my psychology degree, and then I would become a licensed, psychologist, and I would go back home to Wabasca, and I would go back to those children, that I had taught, and I would open up my doors to helping in that way, like, mental health therapy. But that wasn't what Creator had in mind for me. And so I had to listen to that. Yeah. And even though it was really hard, like I was fighting. Initially I was fighting. I was like, no, I'm not doing that. What do you mean put people in a big swing? Oh my God. Wrap them up like little babies. Who's gonna come and swing?
It sounds really nice, actually.
It sounds really weird. But anyways, yeah, I fell into, long, big, dark, deep depression that winter. Because I was being stubborn and not wanting to follow that vision,
Right.
and because I didn't understand it, and I was so young, and I did not know what to do, really, and so I was really trying to just, not think about it and just keep going on my path. So, but the vision had to be lived. And so I started swinging people in 2002, and the demand for it just grew and grew and grew. To this day,
Wow.
the demand is still huge, so huge. And what happened after I had the vision and I had, a year later started actually doing that, people started to hear about it. There was no, advertising for it or anything like that. It was a very spiritual gifting that I was then gifting forward. And so people started to hear about it, and I started to get invited everywhere, like clear across the country.
Wow.
And then out of the country and abroad, over to Europe and Hawaii and Australia, and so it just grew and grew and grew. And I was just following, and I was just listening. And I was being guided by different elders who had heard about me and this vision
Right.
that I had received, and were calling me to come, and because they wanted to share, some things with me. And so I was really lucky that way that I had, had this opportunity to sit with some beautiful teachers, elders, who had some beautiful knowledge to share with me. And so it went like that, and so I was like filling up and filling up and filling up with all this knowledge, like right up to my chin, and I was like, what am I gonna do with all this, and so I thought, I gotta go back to school again. And so that's when I entered into the doctorate program.
Wow.
And again, it's so interesting, because a few years before that, before this program was even created, it was probably like maybe 12 or 15 years before that, I had written a bio, how you write a bio when you're presenting at a
Right.
conference. And,
Yeah.
and I had written at the bottom of this bio one day, I don't know why I said this, but I said that I was going to get a doctorate degree in Indigenous knowledge.
Wow.
And there was nothing of the kind in any university anywhere at the time, right? And so when I felt ready to go back to school, I was really looking around for something like that. And I did find such a program in Hawaii. But then I thought, well, then I'm going to go study Hawaiian culture, and then what am I going to do with it?
Right.
It didn't fit. So then I found Blue Quills. It was Blue Quills College at the time. And they had a program, a 5-year degree, doctorate degree program in Indigenous life knowledge. And but they were just starting it. They were just piloting, and they were only allowing 4 students to come and develop the program as they were doing it.
Wow.
So it took them 10 years to do it. So I wasn't part of that 4 person group that developed it. And so 10 years I waited
Wow.
for the next cohort.
Yeah.
And so in 2012 was when I got accepted into the program. So we were actually the first cohort to go through it after it was developed by that initial cohort.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Wow.
And so there, I was able to just like release all that knowledge that I had been carrying
Yeah.
from the different elders that had been teaching me for all those years before. And I wrote this humongous dissertation. And I did some research on the swing, on the healing swing.
Right.
I came to know it as a healing swing because I witnessed so much healing, like physical healing, emotional, mental, spiritual healing, all across the board, right? It was just, the holistic, balanced healing.
Right.
And so I would talk about it in this way as a healing swing, and that's how people came to know it. And so when I did my research on the healing swing, I incorporated all of that new knowledge into my dissertation. And then I was sitting there one day looking at all these papers, and I was thinking, so what?
Yeah.
So what? Now that I've got this, nicely written manuscript, so what? Like, these things are just going to get shelved and they're just going to collect dust somewhere.
Yeah.
And I thought, that's not good enough.
Mm-hmm.
Like, that's not why I'm doing this. And then I had to really honestly think about, why am I doing this? Who is this for? How is it going to help the next 7 generations?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Because that's what our elders always tell us. When you make decisions, think about the next 7 generations.
Yeah.
So I really thought long and hard about that, and I was like, okay, I need to build something for our children of tomorrow. I need to build something for them. And our language is cannot disappear, because these are spiritual languages, these indigenous languages.
Mm-hmm.
And so I went to an elder at that point, and I said, I don't want to write down the teachings, but I want to share it with the children of tomorrow. How can I do that? And he said to me, write to the children, write stories for the children, and incorporate the teaching within the story.
Yeah.
And I said, thank you. And that's what he did.
That's so beautiful. But translating one gift into your own gift and really carrying that forward is just incredible. That's so great. I wonder if you have any ideas for those that may not have that language piece, if they have been disconnected from their spirituality, their culture, their identity, and who work with children and want to give that gift. What can those early childhood workers do if they've lost their language, if they don't have their language? How do they fill their cup in order to pass that on to children? Do you have any ideas?
Yeah. We talk about how everything's related and everyone's related.
Yeah.
We are all related, and I think that's where we need to begin.
Yeah.
We need to begin with this value we have of wakutuin. And then that leads to wichituin, which is working together and helping one another. And I realize, and especially through, just having conversations with my daughter, who is now a teacher,
Right.
How difficult it is for teachers within the school system to teach the culture and to teach the language. And I really sit on the fence with this one.
Yeah.
Because the culture and the language cannot be taught within the institution.
Right. Yeah.
We can go there to a certain degree, to a certain point, right? Like when I went to
Yes.
the university and learned the grammar of my language, right? If we're going to learn a language from that literacy perspective, then yes, we can learn it in the institution. But if we want to spit out fluent speakers, like fluent Cree speakers,
Yeah.
we cannot do it in the institution.
Right.
That is not the way to go.
Right.
And so when I say I sit on the fence, that's what I mean. I mean, okay, and when I say we all have to work together and that we're all related and connected, then we really have to live that practice,
Yes. Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And so the institution has to be willing to come into the community
Right.
to teach the culture and the language, right? And the language and culture has to be willing to come into the institution a little bit
Yeah.
as well, right? So we meet in those places, and we teach the children how we know to teach. So, so I think we can teach the formality of the language in the institution, but to teach the culture and the conversational Cree or whatever, Indigenous language we're teaching, I think has to happen in the community and in the homes. And so those teachers that are perhaps not Indigenous, or maybe they are Indigenous but don't have the connection to their culture, would benefit so much from connecting to a community, you know, right? And just being adopted into that community, being held by that community and supported by that community to teach, the culture and the language. It's like going back to those days when I, brought my auntie into the classroom, right?
Yeah, exactly.
When
I was thinking of
really,
that.
when I really wanted to bring the children to her and her environment. Because can you imagine how much more rich that would have been if she would have taken the kids into her teepee?
Of course,
Because she always had a teepee set up, right, in her yard. She always had the moose hide stretched on her frame that she was working on, right?
Yeah.
She always had her beading all over her table, and like the kids could have. It would have been so much more rich for them to see that, So.
Yeah. I think you hit on a really important note with thinking beyond the classroom walls, really, and incorporating community, and not even necessarily feeling like you have to be the sole resource, but turning to elders, turning to knowledge keepers, community members, or maybe even events. So I think that's such an important thing that you've touched on, and that is really thinking literally outside the box of the classroom walls.
Yes.
I wonder if...
and I think it's really important what you just said.
Yeah.
That we really need to understand that we are never alone.
Yes. Yeah.
That is so, so important within our Indigenous cultures.
Yeah.
We never work alone. We are not meant to work alone.
Yeah.
In the Indigenous culture, we always hold the child in the center.
Yeah.
And around the child, not the parents, not the primary parents, the elders. The elders, because the elders have lived the longest, right? They have learned how to be a good human being.
Yeah.
They have learned what it is to walk this path of life on this earth, right? And they know all the values, they know all the, ceremonies, they know the language, they hold all the teachings.
Yeah.
So they are the best teachers for the children.
Right. Yeah.
So they share teachings with the children. And children in turn remind the elders of their spirit because they're so close to spirit
Right.
world,
Yeah.
right? And so are the elderly because they're going back home to spirit world, whereas the little ones are just coming in, right?
Yeah.
And so they have this very, very special spiritual bond. And so they help one another. It's really, really important. Where there are children, there should be elders. And where there are elders, there should be children. Always. And so when you say, it's important for teachers to realize they're not alone, it's so integral to the Indigenous way of being and knowing because everyone has to work together.
Right.
So in the Indigenous community, there is no primary child care giver. We all look after the children together. So the grandmothers and grandfathers, they teach the children things, the guideposts of life, the values that we need to live by.
Yeah.
And then the mothers around them teach about how to care about oneself, for oneself, and they feed the children, they give the children their nurturing, and their physical needs are met by the mothers.
Yeah.
And then beyond that, are the fathers, the men in the community that give the protection and the provisions that the elders and the children and the mothers need.
Yeah.
Right? And so everyone has their role.
Right.
But the roles are not so black and white, cut and dry.
Yeah.
I can take on, the role of, cook 'em or mush 'em if I'm going to teach the child something that day. If I come across a teachable moment.
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
For that child, I might have to take on the role of, my husband, if he's gone, away on, I don't know, a major hunting trip or a major business trip.
Right.
I might need to know how to then provide for my children, if he's gone for a long time, or I would need to know how to protect my children if he's gone for a long time. So, those kinds of things, then we can each take on each other's roles as needed. But we also understand what our greatest role is.
Yeah, I think that's important that you've identified that we have our roles, but we also need to see where, there needs to be someone and to be able to kind of mold yourself to fit that, even if it's just temporary, but
yes, and we are never alone. That's the important piece, is that we're never alone.
Yeah.
And a teacher should never, within a classroom, should never feel like she has to do everything.
Yeah.
She has to teach everything that, these children have to learn. Right, within that curriculum. She could look at that curriculum and make decisions on who can best teach this piece.
Yeah.
And then go in search within that community that's closest to her and find those resource people.
I relate to that so much, because when I was a teacher, feeling overwhelmed about even not knowing where to begin and how I could be everything to everybody. So I think that's such a great thing to stress, that, you don't have to do everything.
That's right.
My next question, I want to talk specifically about incorporating Indigenous storytelling into early childhood daycare centers, kind of educational spaces. So do you have any recommendations for ways of incorporating Indigenous storytelling and getting language into centers like that?
Again, I think, we have storytellers. We have like our natural
Yes.
storytellers,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
In every community, there's a natural storyteller. And so I think to invite those people into the classroom would be really awesome. I mean, they would be honored. And children can feel the energy of a natural storyteller.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And they get so much more out of that than if, the teacher tried to do that story,
yeah.
or just have someone else in the within the school do that. So and then sometimes I know that in some school districts they will have like a group of cultural resources that the teacher can just call upon. I think it's really, really important that children are introduced to story at a very, very young age.
Yeah.
Storytelling.
Yeah.
And the art of storytelling, incorporating drama.
Yeah.
Is the way that I love to teach little ones, especially, right?
Yeah.
Because they get right into it. And I mean, at that point when they're so small, like 5 and 6 years old, even 4 years old, they have no qualms about getting up
No
and
shame.
acting. No shame. And it's beautiful, right?
Yeah.
And again, this is how, drama is the way, or role playing, whatever you want to call it, character taking. This is the way, again, that our Indigenous culture told stories, right?
Yeah.
Sometimes through mask making, right? Mask making is another really, really good way of storytelling with children, teaching them how to create a mask and create a character through that mask. And how does the character walk? How does the character speak? How does the character dress? How does the character move?
So cool.
So all those kinds of things, are really great ways to bring storytelling into the classroom for children, but to really encourage them to start telling their own story, right? So just to teach them, if you can teach them a story has a beginning, and a story usually has characters. Who are the characters? What are their names? What do they look like? And then what are they gonna do in this story? What happens in this story? And then what happens? And then what happens, right? And then there's an ending. So, if you just teach them the storyline, they can fill it all in.
Structure.
Just teach them the structure, and then they can fill it in. Kids are so great. Kids are amazing storytellers.
Oh, that's a really cool. I really like the idea of that mask activity as a way of getting storytelling and getting kids to express themselves too. And I was, while you were talking about that, I actually thought of, what do you think the role of technology is in Indigenous storytelling nowadays? Because we have, so many technologies at our fingertips, but you've also, filmed yourself storytelling as well. So, you don't even have to do it necessarily in person to get it in the class or into the daycare space. Do you think that technology is a good tool to use with Indigenous storytelling in particular, or?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, it's just another tool. I always say, how people sometimes will say, if you're going to light the sweetgrass, you have to use the matches. You have to use the matches. You can't use a lighter. I always say to them, I don't know about that. I think if my grandfather had a lighter, he probably would have used it. Because if we're going to do that kind of thing, if we're going to say that kind of thing, like, oh, we can't use these new tools because we have to be traditional, well, then we would be sitting here like, you know, getting the stick on the log and, you know, or lighting the flint, you know, like trying to get a spark out of the flint, you know. So we need to utilize the technology that's available to us. Right? To do the best that we can to teach the children of tomorrow.
Right.
And so now we have, you know, filming. Like, we can sit here and speak in front of the camera and hey, somebody can just turn on their TV or their computer and watch us. You know, and I think that's just much more richer than reading a book. Like, can you imagine if somebody had to read this interview?
Oh, no.
No, that would be really boring, right? But here, like with the camera, with this technology that's around us here, they could see us. They could see the expressions on our faces. They could probably even feel the energy, you know, that we're creating here, right? Through that camera. And so, I mean, you think about great films, right?
How moving
that have been
they are.
produced, how moving they are, and they move our spirits. Right? And that's what we want. That's what learning is, right? Learning is about moving the spirits of the children.
That's so beautiful. I gotta get that framed somewhere and put it up.
Wow.
That's profound. I have one more question for you.
Okay.
And kind of thinking, you know, we're talking about technology and seeing how we can use it. And obviously, there'll be new technologies out there in the future. And it's not specifically technology based, but what are your hopes and dreams for early childhood education? If you have a perfect world, what would that look like?
In a perfect world, I think I would just like to have my own personal cameraman. Any takers out there? And, you know, and just gather children and just walk around with children, and children can just ask questions, and, you know, we can speak in the language, we can, you know, just explore life and, you know, and be filmed doing that, you know, and then just put that out there for other children to learn from. I would love that. That would be my dream, is just to walk around and move around, and whatever that is, you know, whether it's, okay, today, you know, I've got these 4 little kids and we're gonna go visit an elder. And the elder's gonna be like tanning hides, and we're gonna learn the language of that today, you know? The Matayian, you know, and the kids can like get in there and take that, you know, bone scraper and do the practice of it, and then just say the word of it, you know, Matayian, you know, like that would be so enriching for them, right? It would fill their spirit, and at the end of the day, they would go home and they would tell their mom, right? And so that would be my dream world of early childhood learning.
What a beautiful dream, and I certainly hope it becomes more and more common. For sure. Well, thank you so much, Darlene. This was so wonderful. I've learned so much. Thank you for sharing your gift of knowledge, and I know that our early childhood education students will benefit greatly from your experiences and from your beautiful resources. So thank you.
You're welcome. I just want to say one more thing.
Yes.
The most important thing about land-based learning, which is what we're talking about, is the connection that children feel to the earth.
Yeah.
We are living in a society now where we are losing this connection.
Mm-hmm.
And this is leading to the destruction of our mother.
Yeah.
And if we completely destroy our mother, then this is a slow suicide of human nation,
Yeah.
right? And so we need to reconnect children to their relatives, the trees,
Yeah.
the animals, the waters, the stars.
Yeah.
Because we're made up of this. We are all related. We truly are.
Mm-hmm. That's beautiful. And right. Yeah. Thank you. Oh, you filled my cup. Thank you.